Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea's economy is showing signs of a rebound, at least in terms of consumption, but key exports and production continue to suffer from the COVID-19 pandemic. A proposed new capital gains tax could see changes. President Moon says the government needs to make sure it does not discourage small investors who've done a lot to support the market in difficult times. And the United States continues to maintain that it's open to another summit with North Korea. Mike Pompeo saying so for the second time in as many days. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. The Trump administration is still open to a third summit with North Korea. That's according to the Secretary of State. Some experts think this means President Trump might even want to meet with Kim Jong-un before the U.S. presidential election in early November. Jang Tae-hyun has more.
Could there be a third summit between North Korea and the U.S.? Harry Kazianis, senior director at the Center for the National Interest, said in an article that the Trump administration is considering new proposals for a breakthrough with North Korea. And he said it's possible that an agreement could be signed in a potential third summit this fall in an Asian capital. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that while another summit between the two countries is unlikely before the U.S. presidential election, there is still a small chance of it happening. He said that President Trump only wants to engage in a summit if there's a possibility of progress in achieving the outcomes set out in the first summit in Singapore. Kim and Trump have met 3 times since 2018. They saw each other in Singapore and made vague promises for a nuclear-free Korean peninsula. Some experts believe that North Korea will try to avoid serious talks with the U.S. because there's the pressure that the U.S. would want something in return. And North Korea would not want to make any commitments when the U.S. leadership could change. On the other hand, others say a North Korea-U.S. summit is possible as President Trump might take unexpected steps to win more votes. Meanwhile, in Pyongyang, the sister of North Korea's leader Kim Yo-jong said in a statement last Friday that a summit between two countries is unlikely to happen, but you never know. Jang Tae-hyun, Arirang News.
The South Korean government is going to send another chartered flight to Iraq next week to bring back hundreds of South Korean construction workers due to the COVID-19 outbreak there. Around 100 were brought back last Wednesday, but at least 800 are still in Iraq. At least 20 of those who returned were infected, and it's expected that some people coming back on the flight next week will be too. South Korea remains on high alert as imported cases continue to outnumber local transmissions. Of the 60 new cases confirmed on Friday, 39 were imported. Total cases now stand at 13,672. There were 2 additional deaths, raising the death toll to 293. The Speaker of South Korea's National Assembly, Park Byung-seok, has officially proposed that the Constitution be revised, something long debated in the country, saying now is the right time to do so. In a speech Friday for Constitution Day, Park stressed that the Constitution needs to be future-oriented in light of the changing world order caused by the Fourth Industrial Revolution and COVID-19. He said that ideally, given the political situation, it would be revised by the end of next year, with active discussion to start once the outbreak is over. South Korea's constitution has been revised 9 times in total, most recently in 1987. In his speech, Park also proposed dialogue with his North Korean counterpart, the head of the North's legislature, saying the 2 parliaments should be at the center of efforts to improve ties. South Korea's economy is showing signs of a rebound in consumption, but the pandemic continues to hammer local exports and production. In its monthly economic report on Friday, the finance ministry painted a somewhat positive picture of the local economy compared to its June report. The ministry attributed the rise in consumption to the country's economic measures, including relief funds and spending coupons. However, the report noted uncertainties remain high in the real economy, mainly due to the pandemic weakening global demand. To help local manufacturers suffering because of the pandemic, the Seoul city government is going to provide them with an additional $3.4 million worth of subsidies. The first round was earlier this month. In the second round, the subsidies will go to around 400 companies in the fields of clothing, handmade shoes, prints, and jewelry. Firms with fewer than 50 employees can get up to $25,000. The condition is, however, that they maintain their number of workers for at least 3 months. Applications can be made online through July 30th. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news on this Friday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yoo, Global Strategist at Yoo Securities. Mr. Yoo, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me today.
Well, stocks on Wall Street closed lower overnight. A lot going on there. Jobs numbers, retail sales. What's the story in the global markets?
Yes, Dow Jones lost about 136 points, or 0.5%. S&P was also down by 0.3%, and Nasdaq retreated by about 0.7%. But the percentage was actually relatively less than the beginning of the market. If you look at the Wall Street, Dow snapped the 4 days rally as the escalating numbers of COVID-19 cases and hospitalization in multiple U.S. states raised the fears of slower than expected economic recoveries. On the pandemic side, Florida announced it is facing remdesivir shortages, while the New York governor threatened to close restaurants over the social distancing violations. On the macro side, as you said, a lot of news were coming out. The jobless claims in the U.S. rose by more than 1 million for the 17th week in a row, triggering fear of higher than expected permanent unemployment cases. On the policy side, basically they're aiming to do further boosting measures, so people are kind of confused at the current point in time. If you look at the Asian markets, it rebounded slightly. The Chinese market suffered significantly yesterday, falling by 4.5%, and falling for the Shanghai and Shenzhen was down by more than 5%. Such a huge drop has, created fear, but with the U.S. market showing relatively less decline, Asian market rebounded slightly. Most of the markets were up slightly. Even the Chinese market has recovered slightly, particularly for the Shanghai's Shenzhen index. It is up by about 0.8%, and most of the other Asian countries have recovered slightly.
Now, Mr. Yoo, the Korean currency has been holding steady for a while now, it seems, at around 1,200 won to the dollar, a little higher than that. It's down from its highs at the peak of the coronavirus outbreak here in Korea. So where do you see the exchange rate going, and what's going to drive that movement?
Right. If you look at the post-COVID-19 cases, if you look at the currency, it did depreciate as much as 1,242 won to dollar. But after that, we saw in June, it went down as low as 1191. So quite a large variance of about 51 to dollar rate. Now, currently, it has come up a little bit. Now it's staying at around 1206 level. We think that the box range should remain to be there. If you look at U.S. numbers, particularly the dollar index movement is very important. At the current point in time, it is the case there. International capital outflow is happening from U.S. In May. Overseas investors sold about 4.5 billion won worth of U.S. assets, and that is resulting into relatively weaker currency of dollars. And that's why probably is affecting the Korean won to appreciate quite significantly from the peak of 1242 now at 1206. When you look into the future, we think that the Korea having a relatively low leverage ratio of government bonds, government debt, and if you look at the current account side, it is having quite a bit of surpluses. Of course, it is down from the peak, but nevertheless, it is quite sizable current surpluses. And therefore, we think that Korean won should not be depreciating further as the U.S. dollar remains to be quite weak. So we think that the range anywhere between 1190 to 1220 should be the future range bound for Korean won in the future.
Well, the latest Greenbook from the Korean Finance Ministry has, you could say, a more pessimistic outlook for the local economy than it did last month, in large part because this whole thing is dragging on. What do you make of that report, Mr. Yoo?
When you look at this, I think that the government is trying to get some leeways to do aggressive boosting measures. Of course, there are quite a lot of changes happening, but if you look at the one major changes is the level of the daily virus cases, the COVID-19 cases. It has risen to around over 50 patients per day, which fell about a month ago. It was much lower than that. Now it has averaging up a bit. And clearly that is causing concerns about the economic recovery might be slower than expected, particularly on domestic consumption side. And if you look at the export numbers, it continues to remain slump. And that is resulting the Korean government ministry to talk about how the economy is weaker than anticipated, and they're worried about that. Now, with this kind of news, this kind of supports the President Moon's aggressive boosting measures that recently announced. South Korea, the more than doubled its spending plan for the New Deal program. They're talking about 160 trillion won, which is about 133 billion US dollars, and clearly underscoring its ambition to recover from the pandemic by reshaping the economy around technologies. The plan was announced on Tuesday. Still, people are kind of doubtful on this issue. And that's why I guess the government is talking about how the economy is kind of fragile. And therefore, they need to have this kind of aggressive fiscal policies to boost the economy. We think that this is the right way to handle the current situation. We clearly need additional investment as well as strong consumption numbers. For the time being, we think that it is weaker than we hoped for. So with this kind of announcement, we think that the boosting measures should cover some of the losses that we have seen in terms of economic growth rate.
Very interesting point of view, Mr. Yoo. Thank you so much for sharing your insights today. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Now, starting in 2023, South Korea is planning to introduce a 20% tax on capital gains worth more than 20 million won, or about 16,500 US dollars. Those smaller investors had so far been exempt, but today President Moon said the system needs to be implemented in a way that does not discourage individual investors or the market as a whole. That could mean changes to the policy. According to the Blue House on Friday, President Moon said small investors need encouragement, having played a major role in supporting the financial markets. Rather than discouraging them, he said the new tax policy should focus on giving the market a boost. Currently, capital gains tax applies only to those who own more than around $831,000 in a single stock. The European Central Bank has decided to stick with its emergency bond buying program at the current level and leave interest rates unchanged at zero. In a statement Thursday, the ECB said it plans to stick with those policies until there's an inflation outlook of 2%. ECB President Christine Lagarde said early signs of a recovery are uneven and the outlook is highly uncertain. South Korea's Trade Minister Yoo Myung-hee, who's running against 7 other candidates to become the next leader of the World Trade Organization, faces opposition from Japan. However, she stressed during her candidacy speech on Thursday that Tokyo must focus on her qualifications as a candidate and not the two countries' various disagreements. Kim Hyo-sun reports.
South Korea's Trade Minister Yoo Myung-hee, who is running for the next Director General of the WTO, is insisting that Japan will look at her credentials as a candidate rather than the ongoing bilateral dispute between Seoul and Tokyo.
I'm confident that Japan will also look at the candidates. When they actually look at the candidates to Japan, what's almost important is the person's, the candidate's competence and capability to save and enhance the WTO and also to take WTO reform. So in that regard, I will reach out to Japanese colleagues and will present my vision for the WTO. And I'm confident they will also approach this issue rather than in the perspectives of, from the perspectives of the disputes, but from the perspectives of saving and promoting the multilateral trading system.
During her speech in Geneva, Minister Yoo also highlighted that she's capable of carrying out organizational reforms. Yoo, who is running against 7 other candidates, faces opposition from Japan, especially following diplomatic rows between the two countries, stemming from the South Korean Supreme Court's ruling that ordered Japanese firms to compensate the Korean victims of Japan's wartime forced labor. Asked about possible opposition from Beijing backed by fears that regional balance considerations could lead it to lose its Deputy Director General seat, Yoo expressed confidence that she had a great relationship with China while working at the South Korean embassy in Beijing for 3 years and working on the free trade agreement between the two Asian neighbors. Seoul's trade minister also underscored that her vision for the WTO centers on rebuilding trust in the multilateral trading system by making it, quote, more relevant, resilient, and responsive. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Build the momentum
That brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.